It's me, Greed here. Today I want to talk about Servasa because it recently received a rework that implemented a feature onto the map that I think makes it completely broken and competitively unviable, and it ended up not fixing a previous issue with the map that also left the map competitively unviable with minimal competitive integrity. And I think it's important to touch on those things because you would expect with a rework they would actually end up fixing the previous issues, not keeping those previous issues and actually implementing even more problems. So both of the actual issues with the map favor one team. So we'll call that team 1. So if you start as team 1, 2 of the points give you a big advantage, whereas if you're on team 2, none of the points give you any advantage. Meaning if you start on the side of the map as team 1, if you end up getting those points, you end up actually gaining a pretty big advantage over the enemy team, and I want to talk about that. So the first point that gives one of the teams an advantage actually takes place on the point called Palace. Palace is the point with the fountain on it, and basically it's relatively symmetrical apart from two distinct doorways. One of the doorways on one side of the map is completely blocked, meaning you can't go through it at all. However, on the other side, it's open and you can go through it, of course. That means that if you were to stand down main behind the cover that's directly beside that door, it means that on one side, if you get pressured off that cover, it means that you have an escape route through that door. Whereas if you play on the other side, you don't have that escape route anymore. Well, it means if you're on the side with the doorway, you're able to take more aggressive angles, and those aggressive angles are technically safer because you have escape routes, whereas the other team doesn't get those. Meaning that if you play on the side of the map with the door open, you're actually gaining a massive advantage because you're able to apply more pressure to the enemy team and the point itself without actually being able to get pressured as hard. Therefore, you're able to stay in the more aggressive angle for longer, and that likely will end up winning you the point. Now, obviously, advantage is advantage, and disadvantage is disadvantage. Some people might argue that this change isn't big enough in order to warrant the map getting vaulted and put away, where I disagree. I think any form of advantage simply based on pure map RNG of the sense of which side of the map you spawn on is not fair. I should not have a lesser chance of winning a certain point because I spawned on a different side of the map to the enemy team, and I don't think I should be able to beat the enemy team purely because I gained an advantage of spawning on one side of the map either. It ruins the competitive integrity of the game, even if it's a tiny, minute advantage, which this isn't. It's a huge one, but even if it were a tiny advantage, that still wouldn't be fair. Realistically, the best way to solve an issue like this would either to be open up a door on the other side so they're able to get a similar escape route, or to close the door on the other side. However, if you close that door, you're closing a rotation towards the next point, which would slow down the map more and make it feel a bit clunkier and create a bit more choke points. So overall, I think this is more of a bigger map issue than it is anything else, because without that doorway, you make the map a lot clunkier and you tighten the chokes up, but with that doorway, one team gets a big advantage that realistically they shouldn't have. Which means the only way you'd be able to solve this by opening the door on the other side, but that door would go nowhere because there are no points behind it. And that's where you run into some issues with Flashpoint, where depending on the side of the map you get, you can end up getting such an enormous amount of map control simply because you spawn on that side of the map. And that goes for both teams, of course. If you get the point closest to your spawn, you're obviously going to have less inherent map control because you're playing closer to the edge of the map for your spawn. However, in this situation, that doorway is far too egregious to justify the existence of it in order to speed up the map, and realistically, it should be closed. Now, obviously, everything I just mentioned existed before the Servasa rework. So what did the Servasa rework do in particular that made the map so awful, even though it was bad before, is actually taking place on the point called Temple. So, Temple, as you can see from the background footage, is the point that I'm running to now from Spawn a Soldier. And as you can see, I've just ran through this hallway that didn't exist before, that you can access from one of the spawn rooms. And it takes you all the way to the point. All well and good. However, if you go from the opposite spawn room and you run over there to get to the point and you think, oh well, I don't want to run in front of that high ground, I might get shot, let's go through that hallway that exists on the other side as well. Well, it turns out that hallway doesn't actually exist. there is no way to go other than running all the way around to the coast and running around like the enemy point has as well. The other side has that. So you are forced to go this way, right in front of this enemy high ground right there, and there is no doorway given to you like the enemy team has. So again, like I said, if you don't want to run in front of that high ground that I was just pointing at, you have to actually run all the way around to the coast and do this huge rotate all the way around. But the enemy team has that as well. As you can see, that's the rotate that I'm talking about there, and it takes a very long time to go through. Now, imagine there was a world where a Widowmaker was occupying this high ground. If we're looking the direction we are now, it's not that big of a deal because you can just run through that hallway. You'll obviously check the doorway and you'll go, oh look, there's a Widow on that high ground, we'll just run through the doorway and then up that hallway into that room there where I'm looking now, so the Widowmaker can't shoot me. However, if you're on the other side, what do? You have to run in front of the Widowmaker. You have no choice. Otherwise, you have to do this big rotate that cuts all the way around and runs along the edge of the coast. However, you can just shut down that angle by occupying all of your team on top of it and waiting for your Widowmaker to give you info about which side the enemy team is choosing. If they go coast, well, they have to walk through a tiny choke into tanks and spam and all that. But if you go the other way, then the Widowmaker has the potential of just kind of shooting your brain off, and there's absolutely nothing that you can do about it. Now, obviously, because I'm pointing this out, it becomes blatantly obvious how unbelievably unfair this point in particular is, and generally how unfair the entire map is for one side of the team. But how is it that this made it through QA testing? Surely when they were playtesting this, they had some high-level players play this point, and usually high-level players want to occupy that high ground because it's just a great spam angle, it's just a great place to fight, and it gives you a lot of advantages. So surely a high-level team would be able to understand, hey wait, one side is getting this massive advantage where they can walk through a hallway and avoid the high ground, where the other team just kind of has to say, fuck it, and walk into the high ground. It's clearly not fair. No matter how you look at it, it doesn't matter if you think this is a small advantage, a big advantage, game-breaking, not game-breaking. The reality is, this is a ginormous difference between one side and the other side. And that naturally is not fair. It is not fair that one team gets a hallway and the other team doesn't get that hallway. Now obviously, it isn't just a rotate. It's more than that. It's an angle as well. It's a place where you can sit and shoot the enemy team on the point from and be able to escape through if you are in danger. The enemy team, again, doesn't have that luxury. So if, for example, one team is running a rush comp and they rush into that room, depending on which side you're on, you might either be able to escape through a nice hallway and get back to your spawn room, or you might just have to run in front of that enemy high ground again. And well, if they've got someone that's good at occupying the high ground and good at shooting you from high ground, well, you're shit out of luck, unfortunately, because you got the bad side of the map. How this ever made it through testing, I will never understand. Realistically speaking, you would want it to be as symmetrical as possible because symmetry is fair. Now obviously I would understand that the entire map can't be symmetrical, that would be silly, but at least the points themselves, the cover, the angles you enter and leave the point, the doorways to get in and out of the area that you would say is the general fighting zone for that point should be the same and symmetrical, and outside those areas can have a level of randomness and so on that tries to favor both teams evenly, is fine. However, this is clearly a broken map design principle where one team is gaining a big thing that the enemy team has no compensation for. And realistically, the best way to do it would be symmetry, because it's too difficult to balance a map in the way that you can say one advantage is worth the same as another advantage when they are not identical. Now, obviously, with this map being in the competitive map pool, I think there is only one solution to fixing this right now, and that is vaulting the map. I don't think this map is competitively ready for any level of the game. I think even in quick play, this is pretty broken, to be completely honest, and will lead to more stomps and more people saying the game is bad and so on. And I think generally speaking, this is not a good look for your map design team when you can just simply allow such an egregious asymmetry on a point like this, where one team just gains a stupendously large advantage and another team doesn't gain that luxury. That's incredible to me that it made it through testing. But that's all I wanted to say I think the map should be vaulted. I don't think this should be in any of the competitive pools. Maybe quick play, but definitely not ranked. Anyway, I hope you have a good day. I hope that was easy to follow. I hope the visuals made it simple. I love you all. Mwah. Have a good day. Goodbye. 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 Goodbye.